Can you share an experience that you had maybe when you were first transitioning from time in the city to time in the country, when you had that first experience of God's glory being back in nature? One of the times where like, oh, I've heard that my whole life, and now I'm kind of seeing it play out right in front of me.
How about separating the sheep from the goats? I've done.
Okay, go for that.
People could relate to the parables in the conversations and the stories in a way that we just don't relate to it anymore. We think a lot more in terms of brick and mortar and money and stock exchanges, and a lot of the metaphors are lost on us today. Unless you have some kind of experience in that, and you really have to live it. You have to live it for a while before it starts to come alive.
My guest this week is Rory Groves. A decade ago, he witnessed the fragility of the modern economy with our long supply chains and self-insufficiency. So he moved his family to the countryside to try something a little different. It's an increasingly common story today. Successful professionals fleeing the city for the ancient paths. And Rory started out with not much more knowledge than I reckon we have right now. Now today, years later, his family website reads, "We moved our family from the city to the country in the hopes of learning what our great-grandparents knew. That's why we call this place a learning farm. We feel called to share all that we are learning, traditional skills, raising animals, caring for God's creation, and stewarding the land. We do this through events and workshops, summer day camps, internships, and a quarterly newsletter, and by sharing up-to-date stories on this farm blog." In other words, Rory became a teacher, showing people the way down the road that many of us feel called towards. To facilitate that, he's also the author of the book Durable Trades, Family-Centric Economies That Have Stood the Test of Time. His book provides a list of time-honored, family-centric vocations for those men, women, and families asking, okay, once I move to the countryside, then what do I do? Personally, I was pleased to see that my post-apocalyptic character classes of minister and counselor were both well represented. Which ones might you be? I recommend Durable Trades so that you can look into its mirror and perhaps see yourself, your future self, reflected. And that, I think, is one of Rory's greatest values as a teacher. In who he's become, he shows us who we might be. Many of us know how we got here, and therefore what we have to do. Rory, his family, his farm, and his story show us by living example how we can do it. Praise God for the teachers. In our conversation, Rory and I discussed his background and worldview shift, the veneer of civilization, biblical metaphors and reality, food, fiber, and shelter, the pre-industrial village, the church inebriated, and finally, the first order of business, wisdom. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Plus, leave a comment down below letting us know what you thought of the interview. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, the author of Durable Trades, the owner of the Grovestead Learning Farm, the editor of the Grovestead newsletter, plus a husband, father, and follower of Christ, Rory Groves. Rory, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Will.
I picked up your book before I came to hear you speak at the Trad Dad conference in Battleground. I think it was back in May, and I found it to be a hugely inspiring story and picture of what could be for a lot of Christian men and fathers. So I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Well, awesome. It was great to meet you at the conference, and I'm looking forward to having a deeper conversation here.
I think you bring up a lot of really important questions that men are asking. There's a lot of cultural conversation happening right now. What impact does Christianity have on American culture, if any? Can it have an impact in politics especially? But outside of the realm of politics, I think men are beginning to ask, what can I begin doing in my household and in my local environment? And so I think you bring up an important set of questions and answers to those questions that I think a lot of men really need to hear.
Good. Well, thank you.
So let's get started with, maybe we can start with a little bit of your story, because I think a lot of men listening will be able to see themselves reflected in it. You were a software engineer, and then you found your way out of that world. I don't want to lead too much, so you can go ahead and tell that story a bit.
So how did I get into writing a book about trades, starting from a position of high tech? Well, I was I was one of those computer kids from, man, earliest I can remember. I was programming a computer. I mean, I think if I had to put a number on it, maybe I was 7 or 8 years old when I started hacking on a computer with programs from the back of a Commodore 64 manual. If there's any Gen Xers out there, they'll know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
But I loved it my whole life. I loved it. I got a computer science degree in university. Didn't really need it, it turns out, in the way that computing works. College is another topic, probably for another day. But anyways, all consistently through my whole life, I was always drawn to high tech. Always interested in being part of that industry professionally. And that's what I did. I mean, up until just very recently, my whole career was in computer science and programming and consulting and high tech and so forth. I've owned a number of software businesses over the years, collaborated with a lot of other people. And, everything was well and good, as they say, until about a dozen years ago, we moved out to a farm in southern Minnesota. And why did we do that? Well, honestly, initially, we just kind of ran out of space where we were. We had a house in the city, and we had second kid on the way, and postage stamp sized lot, if you know how that is, a lot of traffic, and is a great place. We actually really loved where we were. We always thought we'd stay there, but it just kind of became a logistical issue as where we're going to put more children. So started looking around, and some of my friends who were also in high tech were working remotely from rural acreages. And I just thought, we could probably make something like that work because a lot of what I did was remote based. But even if it wasn't, we could still commute, which a lot of people do as well. Moved out to a farm. We live on 10 acres in southern Minnesota outside of a little town called Northfield. And honestly, the idea was twofold. I'd say one definite aspect of it was we were wanting to become more self-sufficient. We kind of, I don't know, maybe it's the high-tech industry. You just see the pace of change. You see how quickly things go obsolete, and you kind of see how brittle everything is. I mean, of course, I go into this a little bit in the book, but there are so many systems out there that I or my generation were involved in creating, and they're not as stable as people may not have a shiny veneer, but they're not actually as stable as folks might think. And so I think me and some of us out there have kind of sensed this for a long time in coming before there was really any crisis moment, but just the need to become more practical, gain some other skills, even learn to grow food. Those were things that were on our hearts as well. But I didn't plan to do anything different professionally. I mean, I wasn't going to, trade my job as a software engineer to become a farmer. I didn't know the first thing about farming. And I knew, well, the first thing I did know is that I would fail miserably at it. And I certainly couldn't feed a family if I had to. So it was just, truly a hobby farm. I think in the best, in the truest sense of the word, we just saw this as like a great place to raise kids. And the short of it is, without going into, without prolonging this too much, but the short of it is after we got here, after we got on the land, after we started working in the soil, it's like there was something in the soil, I guess you could say it that way. Something happened where my love of high tech and all things modern and novel began to dissipate. And I started to crave this way of life that was a lot more rooted, literally, more working with my hands, working with my family was a huge part. Everything we did on the farm, we worked together as a family. And then my job, this is, I explained it that I'd have to wave goodbye to my family every time I went to my quote unquote real job. Yep. So these are like some of the questions that it started to gnaw on me over a period of years. And I just started to ask the question, is there options for men today who want to do something that's either home-based or just together with their family and has a more long-lasting trajectory? In my career, I mean, I'd say you got about 3 years before you're obsolete. There are some guys, there are guys out there who are still working on mainframes from the 80s. I mean, hats off to those guys, because those are, wow. That's a pretty long career if you're lucky enough to have one of those jobs. But for most guys like me, everything I know is obsolete in about 3 years. And so I just started to crave for things that were more permanent, longer lasting, things I could inherit to my children. I was at this point, we were starting to add more kids. I was thinking a lot more generationally. So I like to say that the land had its own effect on me. That as I got out here, as I started doing these things, and as we started to grow our family, I started to look for a different type of vocation that would better suit where we're going to go, where I want to go as a family.
Oh, I hear that, and there's this romantic kind of appeal to it, while also knowing that it's an enormous amount of work and a big journey. And so, before we get into that, though, one of the things that struck me the most about your book was the way that you paint the picture of just how fragile
Mm.
and delicate so many of the systems that people inside urban areas depend on. I wonder if you could start unpacking that and really put a point on it and say, look, these are the systemic weaknesses that you know about, but there are a few that maybe people don't know about.
Yes. Well, there's a saying, I forget who says it, but we are at all times 9 meals away from anarchy. And
Yeah.
if you think about it, let's just boil it down to the bare essentials. I mean, what are we talking about when we say civilization? We're talking about a very thin veneer, as it's been said, of polish on top of a very susceptible scaffolding, um, that nobody knows really how much this whole thing can hold up to stress. And I think we got a glimpse, and I would say what happened during COVID was a glimpse. I would say that that was just a tremor,
Mhm.
and they did a lot to try to cobble together the semblances of sustainability through the COVID pandemic. Not to mention, the $10 trillion or so we've added to the national debt to try to get us out of um, a crisis. Well, I just think the whole system is like that. I mean, it's a house of cards. The whole economy has been rooted more or less for the last 50, 60 years on inflationary spending. Our government has been doing that, but the citizens demand it. I mean, you get a politician in there who wants to take away somebody's, uh, whatever gimmies, and they're going to get voted out, and they're going to find another politician who's going to get in there and redistribute the wealth of the nation. And
Mhm.
so, we're kind of on this trajectory, which I compare in the book to the late Roman Empire. Of course, everyone likes to, that's the whipping boy is the late Roman Empire, looking at the decline of Rome. But there really are a lot of parallels when you compare things. I mean, our currency debasement is at a similar rate, at 97% debasement in the last 100 years. Um, a lot of the infrastructure has become so commoditized. So many of the systems have become industrialized. Things that used to be dependent on families to produce are now dependent on distant manufacturing plants over in China and over in all these different parts of the world. So while we are in many ways producing as much or more material abundance as we have in former times, it's really dependent on a very fragile, long supply chain. And if any one of the links in those chains goes sideways or breaks, we could be looking at a lot of different catastrophe scenarios. So, I mean, the goal isn't to try to scare everybody. I'm just saying you got to be realistic about it. We are living in a period in American history that is really unlike any other a period of history in the history of the world. And we have a massive amount of affluence, and we do not have the work or even the knowledge to back up a lot of what we're surviving off of. I mean, if the government has to, say, borrow $2 trillion a year, that means that we're living beyond our means.
Yeah.
So you just follow that thread, and a lot of the people that are in the tech industry are very aware of these problems. I don't know how long that can be kicked down the road, but I just figured if you can feed yourself, that's a good place to start. And I realized how seriously divorced I was from the kinds of practices and knowledge that every human generation before myself had. You go back
Mhm.
to the Great Depression, and as disastrous as that was, you were still talking about an age where most of the people could go back to the land if they needed to, and survive directly off the land. Like they still maintain the knowledge, or they had someone in their family that could take them in. In fact, that's exactly what happened with my grandparents. My grandparents moved in with a family in a farm scenario so they could work and eat during the Great Depression. Fortunately,
Mhm.
they still had access to farms. Most of us alive today wouldn't know how to survive off the land if we had to. And so that's the kind of precarious situation we find ourselves in. So from my point of view, I just think it doesn't hurt to regain some of these skills. Um, and the side effect, or I should say the upshot of it all, is I find it to be a superior way to live. Yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but I find it way more fulfilling to eat a meal that I've grown all the constituent parts together with my family with, and then buying that meal from the grocery store. Not only is it healthier in most cases, but there is like just a deep satisfaction knowing that we're closing the loop on things that just like our ancestors used to do for all of time, all the way back to Adam. So I guess that I don't know if I answer your question in a roundabout way,
Mhm.
but I, I would say economically, monetarily is our most precarious situation that we're facing right now. We are just so far beyond uh, return when it comes to the economic policy of this nation and frankly of most Americans. That is we're just beginning to feel some of the pangs of that through inflation. But I think that is the one that is going to, when the dollar fails finally, or where there's a sovereign debt crisis, that is going to be the thing that most Americans are going to struggle with the most because they just didn't see it coming. But you can see it coming.
Mhm. So, a couple questions. Do you have a different perspective on the time that you spent in software now? Like, do you look back on that time and say, "Oh wow, like that would have probably not what a waste of time it was," but do you look back on that with a different perspective than you expected, one way or another?
I see. I guess I don't know how to answer that exactly because you kind of arrive at the conclusions in life based on your previous experiences, and that would
Yeah,
be the same for me in software. I think in certain ways, I know people who grew up on a farm and they hate it and they do everything they can to get away from the farm. So
right.
I don't know. I would say this though. I would say the way I'm raising my children is about as far from technology as I can get them. Now, my oldest is 13, so we're not talking. I mean, we're still right in the middle of parenting, but we have no television in the house. Um, None of our kids have any kind of computerized devices or tablets or phones or anything, and I don't intend to provide any of those things. Um, we try to, as much as possible, we're very limited on social media. We do have an Instagram account, but we don't use it that much. We try to focus on actually print. We do a print newsletter. And
Hmm.
so, like, we just try to keep things as tangible as possible. And what we've seen in our own kids is that they flourish in other ways. Like, they spend so much time reading and actually writing. My son manages the livestock on our farm. My daughter's very busy in the kitchen baking. She just made Christmas cookies today. And so there are so
Wonderful.
many other great outlets that I think technology, at least for children, is a terrible influence. And I think it really robs children of gaining a work ethic, gaining an interest in education and other forms of um, modes of living, because it just is the way it's designed is to really attract and steal your attention. And that's kind of where the game is right now, is as it pertains to all of these media platforms.
And then my second question is: at what point did faith enter your journey, or were you and your family always practicing faithful members during the software days? I reckon probably not, but you never know.
We actually were. Both my wife and I grew
Oh
up
wow.
in Christian homes. My wife's father was a pastor, was a Lutheran pastor. I grew up in a Pentecostal church. And
Mm.
so from the very earliest ages, we were both raised in the church, and we're very grateful to have been raised in faithful families like that. And that was always very front and center in our family and in our desire to raise our children in that way too.
Did that play into your decision to leave the urban areas as well, or did those pieces start coming together later?
Late, yeah, they came together later. I was not thinking in the kinds of terms I'm telling you right now when this all
Right.
started. I mean,
Mhm.
like, it just seemed like a good idea at the time, and it was, but I wasn't thinking about how this would impact my career, how it would impact my view on industrialism and economics and parenting, technology. I mean, I wasn't thinking about those things. I've seen it as it's unfolded since we've been out here. I will say that I have a much closer connection with God, and I see him in a much more visible way through his creation than I ever did in the city. And there are
Mm.
many, many, I was gardening when we were still in the city a little bit, but there are so many dimensions of God that come alive through nature that even if I were to avail myself of the nice natural parks that did surround where we lived in the city, it's nowhere near the kind of same experiences when you are literally running livestock or depending on a harvest or praying for rain, these kinds of things. And a lot of the agricultural themes in the scripture came alive in different ways for us. So I really do embrace the land. I encourage my children to stay on the land, to steward the land. I think it is a biblical principle that the righteous inherit the earth, it says, and I think that we are to be stewards of the earth. And so if we can find ourselves on some parcel of land, it gives you that opportunity to really exercise that kind of dominion task.
Can you share an experience that you had maybe when you were first transitioning from time in the city to time in the country, when you had that first experience of God's glory being back in nature? One of the times where like, oh, I've heard that my whole life, and now I'm kind of seeing it play out right in front of me.
How about separating the sheep from the goats? I've done,
Okay, go for that.
and
Sounds
well, I mean,
great.
it just all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, so that's what that means. I mean, it's not super deep, I guess, but there's a when you work with we have both, and when you work with them, you see the demeanor of goats are stubborn and they're always trying to look for ways to get out of where you want them to be. They're always trying to infiltrate some area of the farm that you've trying to fence them out of. And then you have the sheep who are they're more skittish. You actually here's something, I don't know if this is even some theological thing, but when we move sheep, we have to corral them. We have to get behind the sheep, oftentimes clap, kind of get them moving with a couple people behind them from one pen to the next.
Mm.
I was doing that with my son last night, actually. It doesn't work to try to bait them. And with goats, all you got to do is rattle a can of corn and they come running. That's by far the easiest
Oh,
way. In fact, if you try to corral them, you'll end up just trying to push them from behind. They'll just stand still and they won't move. So, but yeah, so we'll have instances where we're literally separating sheep from goats. Of course, there's the principles of weeding. Oh my goodness, there's so many principles that come alive. Dealing with weeds when they're small. When they talk about that in Scripture about the, the weeds or seeds that are taking root, you have to get after that stuff as soon as you see it, as early as possible. As if you wait for that weed to get established, it's 100 times as hard to remove that. If you wait until it seeds, it's 1,000 times harder to remove that. And so we see those kind of applications in our parenting all the time, that if we see something coming up that is not biblical principle or God honoring trait, we work really hard as young as possible to try to work with those traits in those children, because we just know, we see it on our farm all the time. It's worth every little bit of effort that you put into it when the weeds are small, and to try to cultivate that. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but those are
yeah.
probably those are just a couple of the examples. There's so much about the land and the health of the soil and the kind of crops that it produces, and pruning trees, and we have orchards too. And I mean, it just goes on and on. So once you're immersed in it, the Bible was written by agrarians, if you want to put it
Mhm.
that way, and it was written in an agricultural context. So it's just people could relate to the parables in the conversations and the stories in a way that we just don't relate to it anymore. We think a lot more in terms of brick and mortar and money and stock exchanges, and it's we're a lot of the metaphors are lost on us today, unless you have some kind of experience in that. And you really have to live it, and you have to live it for a while before it starts to come alive.
Do you find that the conversations that you've had with fellow believers has changed, given that now you see like the deep reality of these biblical metaphors? Is like, no, this isn't just a metaphor. This is how the world actually works. Do you find that it's different relating with people of the faith who aren't in an agrarian setting?
Um, I don't know if I'd say it's difficult. I would say I've seen a swell of interest among believers in recent years to become closer to the land. I'd say there's a
Mm,
huge swell right now. I mean,
yeah.
there's homesteading conferences all over um, the country, and they're attended by the thousands. We were just at a homesteading conference about a week and a half ago, and they expect something like, I don't know, 10,000 or 20,000 to come through over the course of a couple of weekends. So people are very drawn to this. I think it's in us. We were designed originally, we were created to tend and keep a garden, right? It says right there in
Mm.
Genesis 2. So I mean, there's a part of the human DNA that is drawn to the natural world. And so I'm not trying to make any um what I want to say, like make anything into like a commandment, but I just think that
Mm.
there is a natural instinct that draws people to it. So I would say, if anything, people are very curious and very interested, just kind of like the questions you're asking me, like what has been your experience and what have you learned about it? And people are very interested in talking about that, hearing about that. We get letters all the time from people who want to find land, they want to raise their children on the land. They're asking for prayer in that regard. And so it's very much pressing, especially younger families. I think they see where things are going and they just want, for all of the reasons we've discussed, I think they want to have a closer connection to the land in a way that they doesn't quite work in the city or in the suburbs.
Mhm. I think that's one of the reasons that I liked your book was that it sort of provides I guess a conceptual bridge because moving from an urban environment, working for a corporation or even a small business or medium business, it's like, well, if I were to move out to the land, going from the idea of being employed by a large employer, even if you can just make that trade wholesale, like just make that switch, well, what am I going to do? A farm is this big nebulous concept.
Hmm.
What are some things that a man can do with his family and at home that help him visualize and actualize his skills and do it so he can envision doing it every single day?
Yeah, and a big reason why I wrote that book is, well, I mean, not a big reason, but the only reason I wrote that book was to answer that question for
Mm.
myself. I
Oh.
I just was at this stage where I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I see where this is going. Yeah, you can make really good money in IT, but that's not the most important thing. Is there a way to make a living, even if it's a smaller living, but to do something with my family and to do something that's going to last, like just to build a generational inheritance?
Mhm.
And by that I mean like a tangible assets, not just money in investments. That can be part of it, but I mean like knowledge, skills. We're raising sheep out here, and our goal is to raise like rock solid, hardy animals that are not dependent on antibiotics or wormers, or they're not, they're good mothers. They breed well. They just generationally very strong, healthy herd animals that aren't dependent. So like if we do that, there are people who have been working on that over in Europe for like 500 years, and their children inherit these bloodlines that are incredible bloodlines. But that, you don't think about that in terms of assets. If you're working in a typical job, your mindset isn't there, but that's something that you can do. There's all kinds of things that you can pass on to your kids. So for me, I guess getting back to that question is, I just wanted to know what my options were. Like first of all, like you said, like is it? I guess people farm, but is there anything else? Because I know I probably won't make it work as farming.
Mhm.
And I found out that there are a lot of options out there, and some are better than others. But there are many options that have survived for hundreds and hundreds of years, and people still make a living in them today. And so that was the subject of the book, was just going through all these different options and how they stack up against each other, and a little bit about what would it look like for a family to work in that? So I did a lot of interviews with people who are working in these various trades, to kind of get an idea of like a day in the life of say a carpenter or a silversmith or an interpreter was one of them too. So
Hmm.
there's a number of those in the book as well.
I was surprised that you included even actors and artists as
Yeah.
well. I thought that was very encouraging.
Are you an actor?
I'm not, but I
No.
mean, to see that the picture that you painted of what makes a society go, I think that there's a way in America, particularly people who live in urban environments, is romanticizing
Mm-hmm.
the labor, which is great by all means, but there are so many different other pieces that feed in to make a society or civilization go, including art and beauty,
Yeah.
and you can't just leave that out. And so your inclusion of artists and actors was like, oh, there's something speaking to something higher, not
Mm-hmm.
just the necessities of life.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of when times are hard economically, it's the basic necessities that are always enduring, right? Food, fiber, and shelter. And I go into that. And the top ranked trades typically are connected to food, fiber, and shelter. But there are teacher in a couple of different variations shows up a few times on the list.
Hmm.
And that's not typically considered like a manual trade, but it's something we're always going to have. And a lot of those other trades, which have not necessarily, they may not even necessarily be viable for everyone, but for those who are skilled in certain ways, they can produce a living. I mean, there are, yeah, certainly, not everyone can pick up a paintbrush and make a living doing it, but there are absolutely families doing that, and it can be a home-centered economy for those that it's the right fit for.
Do you have a community around you where you are? Are you finding that there are people moving to your area and you're building maybe mutual systems of self support of each other?
Well, we're, I would say both locally and external to us, we're connecting with people all the time that are interested in this topic of building durable community. And
Mhm.
so, it's just starting to get networks in place. I think we're very much at the stage of forming relationships, and that's probably
Mhm.
the hardest stage. To really build loyalty in a community is not an easy thing, as everyone who has been involved with churches or church leadership understands. It takes a lot of intention and a lot of sacrifice to build sustainable community. But this is one of those things that everyone understands. If you cannot depend on the large mega structures, on the governments, the corporations, the institutions, if they don't have your best interests in mind, well, you're going to have to do something yourself. You're going to have to
Mhm.
bring it back home, which just so happens is how everybody lived for most of human history. I mean, you're
Mhm.
talking about the pre-industrial village. You have a group of 20 families that would charter a village together, and they'd come over, let's just give an example, into Puritan New England. And they would basically form a covenant with each other, and they would be a church that's living on property near each other, and they're supporting each other, and they're bringing in a blacksmith if that's what they need, or they're bringing in people with different skill sets. But the whole idea is that they're depending on each other. And we look at that today and think, isn't that quaint and outdated? And aren't I so glad I don't need to depend on my neighbors? But the thing about it is, it was an incredibly um, stable way to live. I mean, we're talking for
Mm.
5,000 years, this is how people lived, right? And you wouldn't have all kinds of remote decisions, say woke corporations, determining whether or not what comes into your local store, or whether or not you can shop there during a pandemic shutdown. Well, in a large case, because you didn't need to shop as much, you're producing more of your own.
Mhm.
So I kind of gravitate towards those more. What are the more stable ways to live? We're entering an uncertain period. We're always in an uncertain period, but we're certainly entering an unstable period. And so what are some of those stable ways that people used to live? And that was, in community. These families were way more responsible. They produced almost everything they needed, but they still lived in community, and they still valued the relationships. And I think that's really a big key. One of the things that we lost when we went through the industrialization of this country and the whole world pretty much was the sacredness or the primacy of relationships.
Mm.
And so now we'll make anything, with using technology, if it saves a nickel on the end product. without really any concern for how it affects our neighbors. There's just kind of one rule that we measure everything against, and that's the almighty dollar. But that was restrained through human relationships. I mean, if you think a lot about these villages, these were mostly kin. These were families. They didn't do things just because they could make a buck. Actually, it would probably make you an outcast if that was your mentality. And so they had a safety net that was built into the system where they really loved each other and they really sought what was best. Now, not everyone did that perfectly, but it wasn't so fixated on the individualized success, which is what most of the economy is focused on today, is individualized success. So anyway, those are a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think a lot of people are looking for, is the feeling that it's not just on me. Because once you start romanticizing, the productive household, you begin to realize, I'm sure, that I can only do so much during the day.
Yeah,
I need someone else to be able to I need someone else to be able to do the things that I can't do, and they need someone else to be able to do the things that they can't do. Maybe we could all collaborate together in these communities, to build this self-sustaining, sort of a small economy. And then you look back, it's like, wait, didn't we live that way for thousands of years?
exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Yes, we're
Great
not
idea,
inventing
huh?
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's like
Yeah.
it's like people were so much smarter than we were. And
Yeah.
aren't we the smartest
Well,
people ever?
they were simpler. I think
Yeah.
that's a lot to do with it. Is we live in a very complex civilization now. It's really extraordinarily complex, and it's
Mm,
extraordinarily expensive to maintain the civilization. This is what the Roman Empire essentially ran into at their end as well. They just didn't have as advanced technology as we do. But it's incredibly expensive to maintain the level of complexity we have. And typically, if you do a study of a study of collapse in history, you'll find that when civilizations reach a certain level of complexity, they can't sustain it any longer and they revert to a simpler mode of life. And now, up until recently, people could do that. I mean, you could disband and relocate where the
mhm.
natural resources were more plentiful and you could just set up shop again. That's what we don't know is going to happen. We're
Yeah.
several generations into this complexity. So I think personally, there's wisdom in learning to do things the simple way. I mean, even like woodworking, that's something that my son is getting trained in on. And we're going to go with handheld, hand tool woodworking. We'll
Mhm.
use some machines and that's fine. But, to know how to make furniture just using an axe to fell a tree, to using planes and draw knives and chisels and hammers. There's a real value in learning that. There happens to be a real good market if you're good at that as well. People pay a lot of money for handmade things. But I think there's a lot of value in just learning the simple way that we used to do things for thousands of years. And yeah, so that's all.
What do you find the response has been to the book? I mean, I know some of the answer to the question, but as you put this out there into the world, you did all the research, over these 50 or so trades, and you put
Mm.
it out there, just sort of an aspect of personal interest. What happened when you put that out there to people?
I was really excited when there was one book purchase because I knew, hey, I'm not the only one that likes this idea. No, honestly, I had no clue. It was a shot in the dark. I didn't know if anyone felt the way I did about these things. I just knew that I felt it in my bones. And I had been putting so much time into compiling this information that I thought I would, throw it out there to see if there was any interest. And there was. I've been very pleasantly surprised to see how much interest there is in this topic. I think it kind of intersects a number of things, one of which is looking at trades, reevaluating trades
Mhm.
as really the gem that they are. They're kind of been the overlooked career path for so many, I don't know, decades now. People have tried to avoid it and tried to do anything they can to get into
Yeah.
office counterpart type jobs. But I think it's a good timing. It was good timing to kind of reassess where we're at in terms of work. But then there is this undercurrent of um, there's something really wrong with the way this whole ship is moving,
What?
and
No.
we should probably think long and hard about where we want to be as a family or as a community or as a church. 20, 30, 40 years from now. And we need to start moving there now. Like, we can't wait for Superman to come and rescue us. This is something that we need to take on. So the book definitely has that kind of an ethos to it, because that's just born out of where we're at as a family.
Mm-hmm.
We just felt we're not going to wait around for politicians. Like, this is not going to be a thing that's solved at the ballot box. Even if we have good politicians, we still should know how to do these things ourselves. And, we want to have some kind of generational legacy here. You're only alive so long. I don't want to just make my life about storing up a 401k bank account and then retiring to Florida at the end of all of it. I want to put my life towards something that's going to have a generational impact.
So say more about the church aspect of it, because the week before this conversation comes out, spoke to John Moody for a couple hours, and of course he's outspoken on a number of different issues related to these topics in the church. So say more about that aspect as well, because I think that there are many men and many families that are looking in this direction, and they're looking to their pastors or their communities for leadership, and the communities don't really seem to be on the same page, or the churches have other agendas that they're pursuing, or they just have their eyes off this particular ball. So talk a little bit more about that angle, because it seems like a lot of men feel like, or believe, and it may even be true, it probably is, that if they want to walk this road, not everyone's coming with them.
Oh yeah, everyone. That would be a stretch.
Yeah.
I will say this in agreement with Mr. Moody, I count as a friend of mine.
Mm.
One of the most common letters that I get is from people looking for community of like-minded individuals in their area because they can't find it in their church.
Yeah.
They're often, especially if they're drawn to living on the land or becoming more self-sufficient, there's, for whatever reason, they feel it very strongly, and there's hardly anyone else in their church that feels that way. I could really only speculate, without knowing the specific circumstances, but my guess is that most of the church is so inebriated in popular culture that they don't see it. Like, their blinders are up to certain things, that if they would disconnect from, again, popular culture, the popular entertainment, the movies, the music, the streaming, even in many cases, some of the social stuff, if they would disconnect and just kind of still themselves and really begin to sense out what's going on out there, I think they maybe would come to the same conclusions. But church is really driven, unfortunately, by the culture. And there is such a desire to stay relevant. I'm speaking just of the general church. This could be,
of course,
across the board, but to stay relevant to culture, to be accepted by culture. That was Francis Schaeffer, right? The great evangelical disasters, that the church, what did he say? Decided, rather than being the conscience of a culture, to accommodate that culture. And so we kind of find ourselves several decades downstream of that now. Now, that's not to say they have bad doctrines, or they might line up perfectly with what you believe and what the Bible's saying. But it is very common in my experience that people who want to take more responsibility for themselves, pull out of the corporate environment, build a strong home economy that is more resilient and more durable, that often they're the only ones in their communities. And so that's one of the reasons they contact us, is because we have, like I said, we have like a newsletter, and we have a ministry, and we have events on our farm, and we speak right to this issue of the family economy. We've just made this really the front and center piece of what we want to be talking about and what we want to be encouraging other people to, because we really believe that for the days that are ahead, this is something that Christian families need to take seriously.
So let's talk a bit about the newsletter for a second, and then I have some practical questions that have come up as I've talked to men about your books. So, but let's talk about your newsletter first.
Sounds good. Oh, okay. So just what is it?
Sorry.
So we started before the book was ever written. It's almost 7 years now, or maybe almost 8 years. We started publishing a quarterly newsletter just for fun, with really no designs on it, to share about what we were learning about trying to build a home economy and build a homestead and everything like that. Both my wife and I, we did not grow up with any farming background. Everything that we do is from scratch. So we like to tell people that if we can do it, you can do it too. And you can. Trust me. I mean, I'm serious. You can do all of this.
Yeah.
I had nothing to like on anybody when it comes to living on the land. Everything has been a hard fought, hard won lessons that we learned. But so we just like to share that kind of stuff, and we would start writing some reflections. So this newsletter grew to just a couple dozen friends and family. To our latest one went out to over 3,000
Oh, wow.
families across all 50 states, and it goes on to different continents. And I think it just speaks to there's this real strong desire to find and connect with other families who are doing something like this, like what you described. So it's freely available. So it's called the Grovestead, and you can get it on our website if you go to thegrovestead.com. That's my last name, Grove. Well, it's the Grovestead.com.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find it there. And then we started hosting events we set up a nonprofit, religious nonprofit to host Christian-based events that kind of pertain to these topics of the family economy, homesteading, living off the land, and then just connecting with other families who are doing likewise. So we hold multiple events every year on our farm. If you go to gatherandgrow.us, you can learn a little bit more about that.
Gatherandgrow.us. Yeah, all these links will be in the show notes. Gatherandgrow.us. Yeah, I mean that was one of the things. Once you manage to make your exit and make your way out. By the way, this seems to be the consistent thing that I hear from men who leave professional positions and go out to the farm is like, look, if I can do it, anybody can do it. I love hearing that theme. But you have to really reach out and bring men and families up with you, as opposed to just like doing it. And it really helps to provide a way for men to look and see the way forward from where they're starting from.
Yeah, amen. That's right.
So the practical questions. I was talking with a man recently who made a similar transition as you from Silicon Valley out to purchased a farm outside in Northern California. And I was talking with him, and I was talking about your book, and he enjoyed your book, but where he was sort of, or he had questions, was getting into the economics of it, saying like, okay, I have this high paying professional job, I make the switch, and then there's some period of time where, say you're starting a farm, where the farm has to do a whole bunch of things all at once. You have to get the farm productive, and then you have to get the farm selling stuff and build all the relationships, and that takes a bit of time. So I guess he was sort of wondering about the economic question, not necessarily of a farm, although the specifics of a farm and acquiring livestock, et cetera, but also that gap in time between, okay, I'm gone from my professional urban setting, now I'm in a rural setting, and I'm skilling up in a trade, and the trade isn't just going to produce, $50,000 a year the first year. So there's that gap. And so he had some questions. He wanted me to ask you some specific questions about that because he knew that you were coming on the podcast. I mentioned that to him. So let's talk about that little I don't know if it's 2 to 3 years or 6 months to 3 years. Let's talk about that time in particular.
Okay. So that's a good question. And it speaks to the basic feasibility analysis, I guess you could say, of
yes.
Relocating to the farm. I believe me, I was a business owner for most of my career, and I was all about strategy. So a farm typically isn't going to work in like a business plan fashion. Like it's just you can do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're created. That would be like a corporate farm. Farming as a way of life is a really different mindset. One of the main things that you have to recognize is that your goal is to transition from becoming a consumer to a producer.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you want to do, in my opinion, to get the most bang from your buck for a move like this is you want to look for ways that you can stop consuming and start producing your own in-house things, and thereby reduce the need for an income, whether that's food, whether that's, in our case, our greatest, and it's turned out to be wonderful, but our greatest return on investment is meat. Our freezer, well, I shouldn't probably say this. You can don't have to air this part. our freezers are stocked with chicken and lamb and pork and beef. And I mean, we have a lot of food that frankly wouldn't be able to afford. Yeah, don't come on out here, everybody.
Party at Rory's house, everybody. When's the barbecue?
Bring the grills.
Yeah.
But that's like, you got to, this whole inflation nonsense that's going on meat prices and things like that.
Yeah.
Like we don't see it. And I mean,
now
it's
we're
true.
definitely coming out there.
I know. Well, we'd love to have you for dinner. Will, bring on the whole family.
Thank you.
But that's just okay. So that's one spot. Now you're not going to replace your entire income, based on a meat budget. But my goal in saying that is just to share that it's a mindset that you're shifting away from a consumerist culture, which is what we've been trained to do. We've been trained to earn a lot of money, hire out all the help, focused on one narrow specialized task, and then make as much money as you can from that and buy everything else you need because you're too busy to learn how to do everything. So when you're coming out to a farm setting, you're trying to learn to become a generalist. You want to become proficient at many things. And this is, again, we talk about how people used to live. Most people were generalists. In fact, a lot of the trades that are professional occupations today didn't exist 150 years ago. Well, I mean, most of the trade, but I mean, they were just done on the home farm. Like people made their own shoes. They were their own veterinarians. There was very little involvement in a lot of the things that we outsource today to specialized tasks. They weren't whole professions. They were just done, soap making. I mean, there's so many things that I could go on and on about this. It was just part of the production of the farm. And so actually speaking to this very point, I have a podcast or a talk that I gave that you can download on our website for free. It's called what did I call it? Oh, Will Work for Food. Will Work for Food. The Economics of Self-Sufficiency. And I go into the very specific topic is that if you're coming out to a farm to try to replace your, IT computer programmer job income, it's going to be really hard. And you're probably going to produce a job that you don't like anyway in the process. If you're going to come out, the main goal in the first years is wisdom, is what I tell people. Okay. You want to learn. You're there to learn. The Bible says that wisdom is more precious than silver, than rubies, and all these things, and that you should be focusing on gaining wisdom. It says that get wisdom, get understanding. If you're coming at this cold with no background in this kind of thing, your first order of business is to grow wise. You need to learn what you're doing before you try to build a business plan around it. The secondary thing is I see a lot of families come out to the country. Maybe they get excited. They read a Joel Salatin book, or they saw Justin Rhodes, or they saw someone doing it very successfully. And they think that they're going to be able to emulate that success in a very short amount of time. So they do what took my family 10 years. They might try to do it all in 1 year. And I would caution families that you can run the risk of really burning out your family in the process of trying to achieve your dream. So I encourage families to take it slow and learn at the beginning years. And then once you get a handle, and it might take you a little while, once you get a handle on what you're doing, then write the business plan, or then develop if this makes sense. But don't quit your day job all at once. Try to find some kind of happy medium where you might have to take reduced pay. You might take a job that just allows more flexibility, but it's not quite as much income. Or you might have to downsize your expenses to make it work. We know a lot of families that have relocated, or they've sold their homes and moved into smaller homes to get that was the painter that I interviewed for the book, in order to get his small business started. So there are creative ways. You're not locked into your life right now. You can make some drastic moves, but I would say initially go slow and learn what you're doing if you don't have a background in this, and then develop. The wisdom will come. And frankly, I believe if you're trying to bring your family together in the process, which is what the focus of the book is on, is family economies, I believe that there is a blessing from God in that process. And I believe that He will lead you. He wants you to be together. He wants you to live on the land. He wants you to enjoy the blessings that He has for you. And so, it may not be quite the same tax bracket, but what's the difference? If you're enjoying your life and you're raising godly offspring, and you're passing on a generational inheritance, I'd much rather have the latter. And that's basically kind of what we've learned to do.
Can you say more about the patience angle? Because there's a couple different competing ideas. Like, yes, okay, we're all high achieving, motivated, ambitious men, and we channel that ambition into making it work on the farm or the homestead. Fantastic, praise God. But there's also a component of like, wow, our backs are really against the wall societally as well. There's a feeling like how to get it running as quickly as possible to be balanced with what you said, which is like, no, this is going to take time one way or another. Like maybe you can talk a little bit about your own process of gaining wisdom or the patience that you learned through it, because 10 years is a significant investment of time. I
It
mean,
is.
it was, a couple of years ago, it was a different place, for sure, like aspirational even then. But talk a little bit about how maybe you've had to learn this lesson.
Oh, absolutely. I think there were, if you remember the '08 recession, we moved out here, I think in 2012. So we were still kind of on the heels of that recession. And there was an uneasy feeling about where things were at. And we had, remember all the TARP, remember how much, remember how much uproar there was over the $800 billion of TARP money that was spent and that the
Oh
whole
my
Tea Party
goodness.
formed around that. I mean, it was a massive protest. And we'll throw $800 billion out the window like it's nothing in these days. In this day, I
Yep.
mean, every year there's another $1 trillion. So, anyway, back then, yes, I had very much that concern. I mean, but the thing I learned is that you couldn't do it all. I mean, you literally can't do everything. And if you think you're gonna buy some seeds and store them in a freezer and then just grow food when you get hungry someday, you got another thing coming because I mean, we are still grappling with how to grow enough food to feed our family just from our own garden, and we've been at this for a long time.
Mm,
Now, that said, is I do think that I think there's grace for that, and I think that maybe if the Lord puts an urgency on your heart, it's probably because He wants you to get started somewhere somehow,
mm,
um, and it may not even happen right away. I think about that all the time. Like, well, what's the timing of all of this? Well, we just don't know. We're not in control of
yeah.
that. And you kind of know what you're capable of. You know what your family's capable of. If you're burning your family out, then you're pushing it too hard. And as a father, those are the kind of cues that you need to be able to read. Um, I would say that coming back to that question that we were talking about before, one of the things that was also different about pre-industrial times is families worked many different trades. They were not specialized in just one vocation, very rarely. I mean, like George Washington was a surveyor, but he was also a gardener and he was also a orchardist. And, Ben Franklin was a publisher and an author and a statesman and an inventor. And it was very common for families to have 3 or 4 or 5 trades that were overlapping and complementary, for example. And so the burden to earn an income from any one individual skill set was not as great as we think of it today. Like, well, I have to leave uh, being a computer programmer and become a chicken farmer. And we're
Mm.
looking at either or. I would say, in terms of that profession, if you can maintain, uh, maybe you can negotiate for a different hours or working situation that allows you a little bit more flexibility or freedom. Maybe a lot of people I know have been able to negotiate a work from home arrangement, which allows them a ton of freedom.
Mhm.
So if you're not trying to replace the whole income all at once, it's a lot easier to start something up and to grow it year over year than it is to make a whole trade and then to start something else up and then something else up. And that's part of the advantage is that if you can ease your way into it without it being an all or nothing. Now, some folks, they maybe work in a trade like carpentry and they can pretty much be in demand anywhere they are.
Mhm.
And so you could live in the city and have plenty of work, or you could move to a small town of 10 or 20,000 and have plenty of work. So uh, it just depends on kind of where you're coming from.
So I also have a lot of female listeners, a lot of wives. Maybe you can talk for a little bit about what that process was like for your wife and your kids. Like, we're moving to the country. Here we go. Let's do this. Like, what was it like for her? Was this something that she was excited about? I imagine she was supportive of it. But what's her growth process been like over the past 10 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly was my idea starting out, but my wife, Becca, her name is Becca, she's a wonderful wife, and she always loves an adventure, is the thing I say about her. And so she was initially not really sure about that transition. But honestly, once we got out, started looking around, and she started to envision what her life might be out in the country and so forth, a lot of those concerns went away. Um, and over the years, I mean, she's embraced it. We absolutely love the lifestyle, and we love kind of what we've been able to create here. We homeschool, of course, and we have 6 kids now. And so
Wow.
integrating our kids into the farm, it's such a central part of how we educate, I guess, and live. It's kind of like, I don't know where one ends and the other begins, because we use the farm as a basis for our homeschooling, and the education never really stops, but it's also career preparation. I mean, my children are learning things that I want them to know when they're older. Um, and then it's also it's a sanctuary for us. I mean, we worship here. You know, we have our
Mm.
most important church is the one right in our home, and so this is all part of what makes our family economy, is all of this together kind of incorporates. And that's not to say that you can't do these things in another location. I don't want to restrict people or bind people to just being on a farm, because that's frankly not possible for everyone to do that. But there are so many elements that you can do right where you are. I We started initially. We were in an apartment, living in an apartment in Nebraska, and we had started with potted tomato plants on our apartment balcony. Now, I wouldn't quite say it was self sufficiency, but it
Sure.
was starting to get some idea down. It was starting to learn a little bit about growing, and
BLT
as
sufficiency.
yes, right, right, as we started to grow and move to, we were in the city after that for a long time, and we just used what we had. And I think, if it's something that is on your heart at all to move in that direction, I do believe that God probably put it there, and so it's a desire that he wants to answer. So it's something to steward and pray over and wait on him, trust him.
Mhm. So looking back, 10 years to when you started this adventure, if you could say two things to yourself from 10 years ago, knowing that there are probably a lot of men looking at the start of this journey themselves, one would be a warning or a word of caution, and the other would be a word of encouragement. What would you say to yourself starting out on this journey?
Yeah, well, I would say certainly as the word of caution that we kind of touched on already was to take it slow and to learn to walk before you run, and take advantage of what you have now. Don't delay moving in the direction that you feel led until you have, the perfect piece of land. Don't do
Mhm.
that. I mean, get creative, take advantage of the opportunities that are around you. One that just pops to mind is a lot of people get land by starting out by renting it from someone else. And so they are able to, they maybe meet a farmer who has a couple acres he'd rent if you wanted to go, if you lived in a place that you couldn't, you couldn't grow a lot of food. You could build a relationship with that farmer, and sometimes those relationships turn into offers to sell the land. But my point is, I would say start somewhere and do it together. Focus,
Mm.
make bringing the family together around what you're doing, around the work, make that the priority. Find ways to bring your family together, and then see if God blesses it. And don't let fear get in the way. That would be the other thing. Is I know that we live in a time where there's like a lot of uncertainty, but don't let fear of a job situation or a mortgage or um, a fear of others, opinions of others. If God has put something on your heart, you need to be obedient to that call and step forward in faith, even if you don't know how it is all going to work out. I think
Mm.
someone has said faith is taking the first step when God hasn't shown you the second step. So take
That's
those steps
great.
of faith. And we have seen this one thing that we have seen over and over again prove fruitful for families is to pray and ask God for a vision for your family, and then take that first step. If you feel these things on your heart, he might give you, it might just be a phone call. or it might just be what would be another example? It might be relocating to a house with a little bit of a larger property. There might be uh, changing a job or negotiating with your boss for a work from home situation. Whatever it is, just try to find out what God's vision for your family is, because I believe the family economy principle is that God brought every one of you together for a purpose. He brought you and your wife together. He brought the specific children into your family for a purpose. And it's up to the father to figure out what that purpose is and then to lead his family accordingly. But God will tell you if you seek him, but go do that first.
Hmm. So, what are your plans for 2024? That's beautiful, by the way. I'm going to be thinking about that. Faith is taking the first step when God doesn't show you the second step. I'm going to be thinking about that one a lot. Thank you for that. So, what are your plans for 2024? We talked about a couple things before we hit record. Some of the things you've got in the works.
Yes. Well, we have a new book coming out just called The Family Economy. And so you can look for that coming out. It'll probably be in the second quarter. My guess it'll be somewhere around between March and June, and that'll come out. And that'll be everything we're talking about in a nutshell. It's the family economy in a nutshell and how to get started. Is it something very practical that I can put in people's hands so they can kind of have a simple conversation about what this is about, and then how they can begin to implement it at home, no matter where they are. And then the other thing is that we have, we'll continue to do our events here at the Grovestead. So come to gatherandgrow.us if you're interested, and we'll let you know when those are posted. But we typically will do several events a year here on our property. We'll continue publishing the newsletter, and then I've been getting some more speaking invitations. So I'll be going around and sharing some more too in different locations as we're able. You can't leave the homestead too often. It's the thing that we're learning about what our limits are. So it's a lot easier for us to host events here, but we really enjoy when we have a chance to go off site and meet some other folks in their neck of the woods and encourage them as well.
And the newsletter is it free, or it's a paid newsletter?
Newsletter is free. Yep. Come to the website, gatherandgrow.us or thegrovestead.com. It's free. It's about 10, 12 pages. We put articles in there of other families who are making the leap and how they're doing it and what God's doing as a result. Our last issue just had a father down in Texas who is starting a handmade toy business with woodworking. And he's in transition right now, but it's pretty neat what God is doing in their family. So we just try to put things like that in there and encourage families who are already walking this direction. So yeah, definitely come check that out if you want to follow up with us and kind of get some more ideas for your own family.
That's great. Okay, so where you'd like to send people is probably the grovestead.com, gatherandgrow.us. Is there any place else you'd like to send?
Either one. They're kind of one's our family blog, and we just link over to the events website. But either one will get you where you need to go. Also, if you're interested in the book, I guess we could mention that too, Durable Trades. That's the compendium of 61 trades that are the most durable throughout history, and also ranked in order of family centeredness. So you can kind of get an idea of which vocations are still options if you want to work together with your family.
Yeah, it's actually practically a pretty short book. There's the introduction. It's not actually expected that you'll read all 61 trades. I just went to the ones that appealed most to me.
Yeah, the trades make up a large chunk of the book, but you don't have to read it back cover to cover. There's some reflections on the times we're entering in, what we've shared a little bit about here today. I called the challenge ahead, and then there's some reflections on what we've learned in our own family, trying to become more self-sufficient, also trying to build a family economy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and for your time today. I know you've got a lot going on at the farm, so I appreciate you stepping out to chat with me today.
Oh, very happy to do it. I'm glad to be a resource. Reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. I love to hear from dads and love to encourage you guys or pray for you any way that we can.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll have a lot of men in my men's group, especially, that are looking in the direction that you're pointing. So I'll be sure to send you any follow-up questions that they have.
Please do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Will.